Last summer, I had the amazing experience of working and leading tours in the longest cave in the world. After working there for a few weeks, I started hearing stories of some of the other rangers' experiences. I will share them in the future if I get there. Okay. Mammoth Cave has a long history of paranormal experiences. It is the place that inspired H.P. Lovecraft to write The Beast in the Cave. And I have personally met rangers who have seen full-body apparitions, had orbs that have flown around tours, and have been forcefully shoved to the ground while leading tours. My first experience happened just a few weeks into the job. I was trailing our most popular tour, the Historic Tour, and we had just made it to the second stop of the tour, at Giants Coffin. This is a place that a lot of rangers, including myself, like to turn out the lights and show the tourists total darkness. It is also known to rangers as a paranormal hotspot. As I said, I was trailing the tour, which means I was at the back, just watching over the tour. The tour was well behaved, and I was just sitting there enjoying the darkness. It is kind of peaceful, as I was looking back the way we have came from down area as known as Broadway. There's a place also down there called Cyclops Gateway. I saw a light. It was a bright light. It was like a prick of light. Of course, I thought I was just seeing things, so I held my hand up, thinking that if it was in my head, I should not be able to block it out with my hand. Surprisingly though, I was. And I just looked at it until the lights came back on. And before the group moved on, I went and looked where I've been. It was just a rock with nothing on it to reflect any light. I do not have any explanation for this. I have seen this phenomenon one other time in another room known as the Methodist Church. Another known hotspot, at about a month after this happened. I was talking with someone, and they all of a sudden pointed to Coffin's Corner. And when I told some of the veterans, they were not surprised in the slightest. Now, my next experience, having several months later, I was leading a different tour, the Mammoth Passage Tour, and I LED the group back to a room known as Raff Finnisk Hall on the tour. I would turn the lights out there and tell a story of Charles Harvey. It is a very old story dating back to the 1800s of a man who got lost in Mammoth Cave for 39 hours. I won't go into the whole thing. The short version is, though, that he forgets his hat and goes back in to get it. He gets lost trying to rejoin his tour group, and eventually his light goes out. So, he sits in total darkness and silence. He starts to go mad and starts banging rocks together. It's because the rocks banging that he is found and rescued. Now, when I finish the story and turn the lights back on, I am taking a few questions. Then back down the passageway, we hear knocks banging together. Now, I knew that my trailing ranger was back down there controlling the light switch, and I thought he was doing it, so I played it off as a joke, saying E.T. could be the ghost of Charles, still lost in the cave. On the way back out of the cave, I asked him about the rocks, and he said, "I thought you were banging them together." I later found out that he was about 100 feet down outside the passageway, looking at old signatures on the wall when he heard it too, coming from back where we were. He has had his own experiences, and I trust that he was not pulling a prank. Now, if I piqued your interest in Mammoth Cave, go and visit. Ask the rangers if they've had any experiences. They might just tell you a story. If you want to go to the most haunted areas of the cave, come and visit during the summer and take the Violet City Lantern Tour. You get to walk by the tuberculosis hits where people withered away in the cave hoping to be cured, and where they found a 2,000-year-old Native American mummy who was crushed under a fallen rock. I'm usually a lone man adventurer, especially when it comes to hiking, because my friends are pretty inactive people. So, whenever I take them hiking, they usually slow me down. So, one Saturday afternoon, I decided to go hiking, even though it was about 2 p.m. already. I've hiked the same trail plenty of times, but only in the early morning. So, knowing the length of this trail, I knew that by the time I finish it would be close to sunset. The trail was about a 9-mile round trip from a steady incline coming back up from the trailhead to about halfway. The The trail runs through a thick covered forest, and a remaining of the trail runs along the side of an exposed mountain. Even at the peak of the sun, light barely penetrates the thick treetops of the forest. So when I started the trail, I passed a few hikers who were coming back, but realizing that I was maybe one of the few people who were still on the trail, I sped up to pace to make sure I finished before sunset. Everything went fine, while hiking as I powered through the trail fairly fast. Getting to the end, taking a quick 5-minute break, and then turning around, by the time I was halfway, it was about 4 p.m. The whole way back, I was alone on the trail, coming since I passed a few people who already made the turn around. The sun was already starting to hide behind some of the mountains, and the forest was already really dark. So I powered my way up the incline. The whole way, there was not a living soul on the trail besides me. I was already kind of creeped out being by myself on this trail. So I just listened to music and try not to pay attention to anything else but the trail. As I was walking, I saw a black mass, about the size of maybe a rabbit or a skunk, run across the trail. It definitely wasn't an animal because it was too fast and there was no defining color, shape, or anything. It was just a mass. It freaks me out a little bit, so I started to jog the trail. The whole time, I can see the light dwindling and it was getting darker by the second. As I was jogging, I just had the feeling something or someone was following me. I didn't know what was behind me because the whole trip back, it was just me on the trail. I pulled out my pocket knife that I always carry with me just in case I had to shank something or someone. About halfway through the forest, I grew tired of jogging, so I decided just to walk, but keep a fast pace. As I slowed down, I had the urge to look back, and I did. I took a look over my shoulder a few times. I kept a fast pace walking, and for about a good half mile or so, I was close to the trailhead when I decided to look over my shoulder again. When I did, I saw a human-like black mass trailing behind me about 30 or so feet behind. This mass had a definitive head and upper body shape, but anything below the waist was just a black mass. As soon as I noticed this mass, just in the blink of an eye, it darted into the trees, of course, scaring the hell out of me. I darted for the trailhead. Thankfully, I was closer than I expected and never was so happy to see sunlight in my car. I was running so fast to my car that I didn't even realize that there were still people in the parking lot of the trailhead. We're getting ready to leave as well. And so I was sitting in my car, shaking and trying to get myself together before I drove off. I haven't gone hiking since that day, and it's been over 2 months. I did a little research on the trail, and the trail used to be a travel place for a gold mining towns. It was forgotten from was 100 years. I've worked as a pack trip outfitter, ranch hand in the middle of a national forest, and spend at least a week each month camping. I'm doing dog mushing now, so I'm outdoors now in times when it's colder and darker and further into places that people don't often go. My story is a two-parter, with the first part being just past the New Mexico border into Arizona. Anyways, I see 5 or 6 elk cows burst onto the road, and I slam on the brakes and swerve all the way off the shoulder of the road, but I can still almost hit one elk that was bigger than the rest. It looked like it was going to hit me straight on and crash into the front of my window, killing me like I heard something happen to a guy with a horse earlier that year. I felt this really calm feeling, and I felt like that would be the end. Everything fell slow, and I got a good look at it. It was the size of a moose, but had no antlers of any kind, in the build of a typical cow. Cow is in a female moose. The other animals were typical elk cows, but this one was larger and cover from head to toe what looked like to be large gray wool. Like an Angora goat that needed shaving so bad that it starts to almost look like dreadlocks. Luckily, I get past it and see its head go over the roof of my shitty Ford Taurus. This is the moment I remember best because for just an instant before its head went over the roof, I felt like it could see me and it knew that I was looking at it, even though its eyes were covered in thick gray wool. And it hit the back of my car. My bumper had a new dent. But by the time I got out of the car and to see if it was good, it went into the brush. My friends think it was some kind of Sasquatch, even though it was certainly a small-footed quadruped, and called it a Bigfoot Taurus. My wife says it was probably the spirit of death and that I died there, but I continue living on what my mind wants to happen. The second part is that I was a few miles off the ridge that overlooks Strawberry in Utah, and I got this old aspen grove with this really thick aspen on both sides. I mention this because with a string of 12 dogs behind an ATV, there wasn't enough snow for sleds. There really was nowhere to go but forward. You couldn't guide the dogs through trees like that, so it was always forward till we got to the end, and then we would loop, and that would bring us back on the trail to take us back to base camp. Which was an exciting thought, because I'm using just a headlamp, and it was late and cold, and then I saw it again, running on my left side in the same direction as us, but also towards us. I wish I would have grabbed a camera. But imagine the franticness of watching my dogs to make sure they didn't chase towards it or head off the wrong way. In dog mushing, you can never take your eyes off the leaders too long, or something can go wrong, and to stop the team, it would make their sure to go toward it and caught in the trees. So really the best thing to do was to go faster. Keep the dogs busy so they don't chase it. So I'm just looking at it. At the pack leader, ahead of the team, a fallen tree or a cattle guard taken too fast can injure a dog just like a moose. At the creature, then reaching around in my emergency bag, back at the leaders and pull out my just-in-case gun, I click off the first two chambers. I keep empty. I have the gun pointed straight up in the air, and live ammo is ready to go. I really didn't want to shoot it or even frighten the dogs of the gunshot, but it keeps getting close, so I fired a shot a few feet above it, and I hear it hit some branches. Then I look back at the dogs to see if they were continuing to be good. They were stuck in a thick growth of trees. I kept looking around, but that was the last I saw of it. Although the rest of the ride I was jumping at shadows. Pretty crazy. But the craziest thing, as that tiny moment though, is, oh shit, it's death again. But this time is going to take me for real. This was in a state wilderness area in the northeast and nestled between uninterrupted miles of mountains, pine forest streams, and no vehicle access, only rocky footpaths with extra large rocks every once in a while in the beginning to blog out the possibility of a car or ATV or bike showing up. A road 2 to 3 miles away, but 10 miles to the next real road with traffic, about 7 miles to where houses starts, but 10 miles to a real road with more than the occasional building, and 20 miles from any sort of town. Most of the oddities have been tree structures. One was a low TP-type structure of about 6 logs. That was off-trail about a 2-hour walk from a small dirt that you can dump your car. My thought is someone had a tent frame out of logs and camped there. It was cool, deep into the far inner side of the wilderness. I've seen long branches of mini logs, stabbed horizontally about 5 to 6 off the ground as well. I've also seen 2 trees next to each other that both fell over, but they still had their roots in, forming a big X. But the weirdest one was the jungle gym or high bar type thing. It was off a path, also about 2 hours down and up around a footpath that was very deep in parts where you had to hold on or risk falling backwards off the rocks. So I don't see how someone could have carried any tool or ladder to do this. There were thick woods and very few fallen rocks. So I don't see how someone could have carried any other tool to do this. Maybe it was a mini tornado, but 6 of them didn't really fall. They were pushed, if that makes sense. It's like they were pushed in to make a structure, like you would hang a pig over a fire with or make a tent frame. There was a log with brush on it, anchoring 3 logs together on the side, and it landed perfectly on the other end and rigged it into one knob on the living tree to its right. I jumped up and hung from it, but it didn't budge, and it held my weight fine, and I weigh 185 pounds. The more I inspected it, the more I came to the conclusion that it was made at night. The log across the top was perfectly horizontal. A fallen branch can't get wedged in perfectly, and on a perfectly horizontal line like that. That's not how branches fall, but more importantly, the log running across the top looks like it was broken off by the healthy, longer tree pushed down that it was resting on. But then it should not have fallen about 10 feet to the right and facing to the opposite direction, a tree gradually dipping down because its troop system is muddy in soil, doesn't fall the type of force that thrust a tree on top of another one in the fling it 5 feet towards. So I'm not sure what's making these. I have a lot of friends thinking that it might be Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something along those lines. What do you think? I'm a park ranger here, and here's a personal story of mine that was pretty creepy. Me and my ex-girlfriend decided to have a date night since we both had the day off of work. So we did the usual dinner in a movie thing, and afterwards we decided we would go for a midnight drive. So we drive about an hour and a half out of town, going nowhere particular. We just knew that we were going to get it on to the stars. After scoping out a random dirt road, I took my truck down and parked in an open off to the side next to the forest. The entire area was surrounded by forest. After about 10 minutes of kissing or decide to get down to business, so we get in the back seat and start tearing each other's clothes off. After about 5 minutes, headlights. Headlights are heading towards where we are, but not directly at us, so we're both rushing an attempt to get our clothes back on, thinking for some reason it might be the cops, which makes absolutely no sense now. My pants are nowhere to be found, and either is her shirt. Now keep in mind, the closest house to the road we were on is probably 30 minutes away. We kept fumbling looking for our clothing and eventually found it and struggled to get them back on. The truck keeps getting closer and closer, but like I said, not directly at us, until we finally realize it's not somebody coming to yell at us off their property or the cops. In fact, they can't even tell where we are because my truck is black and I'm parked almost in the thickest part of the forest area. Finally, an old beat-up F-150 parks his truck about 50 feet from us, Lisa's truck running, and gets out. He walks out to his truck bed, grabs his shovel, and starts digging into the ground. He did this for a good 30 to 40 minutes, while we just sat there in silence, afraid to move or speak on the off chance he hears us. He stops digging and lists something out of the ground. It's a decent-sized object, but it was too dark to see exactly what it was. Picks it up, places it in the truck of his bed, and goes back for the shovel and places it in the trunk bed as well, and drives off into the night. Me and my girlfriend decide that it's best to wait another 20 minutes before we start the truck. To this day, I have no idea what that could have been, but I really hope at the worst it was drugs. In 1991, I was hunting the Tiaga unit and shot a 4-point at about 200 yards down his deep ravine. He was just up in the bottom on the other side. So I took the shot because there was a flat hike out following the bottom of the ravine to a road 3 miles away. No way I could pack the deer up and make that hike out there. It was a chore to say the least. But it was a clear shot, and I dropped him, later to find out that it was a non-lethal hit, but the deer slipped and broke its neck. A whole another story. Anyway, I had a very early Elkhorn handle Gerber folding blade knife in a leather case of my belt. My grandfather had given it to my dad years before, and my dad gave it to me. As I was sliding down the ravine to retrieve the deer, I followed a short blood trail that located the deer, went to grab my knife and get it for the hike out, but the knife was gone, the sheath open and full of dirt. Not only was I mad, because I had to make a decision to leave the deer until I could get a knife back to where it was or pack it out whole. After looking around a bit for the knife, I sacrificed my tascoscope and broke out a piece of glass in the front and rock to use it as a knife. It took me about 2 hours to cut with fingers to get the deer to the piece of glass. I broke the ridge open, tore my t-shirt into strips, and made a backpack out of the carcass and packed it out. What a nightmare. When I got home, my father told me he got a call from my grandmother, said she had died of a heart attack earlier that day. I didn't tell my dad I lost a knife. I just took a quick shower, went back down to the ravine, retracing every step looking for the knife. When I got to the bottom, I had not found the knife. It was getting dark, and I had a long hike out with a flashlight. I propped myself up against the rocky ledge and had tears in my eyes about my grandfather's passing. I wiped my eyes and looked down at my feet and saw that I more or less hoped with a tiny point sticking out of the sand. I brushed the sand aside from my foot, and there was the knife. The sad part is, a few years later, my dad mailed me the knife to my PO box in Resport, but he put the wrong box number on it. The postmaster refused to give me the name of the person who had the box, but later asked if they got a knife in the mail, and they denied it. I'm a park ranger, but I've never really experienced anything creepy while being one. But when I was 14, I was at my grandfather's hunting camp. My uncle had just bought a new hunting camera and wanted to test it out, so we set it up in the woods. I got the brilliant idea to cope in the woods with my 2 other cousins and moon it. So when he took the card, instead of wildlife, he would see some ass cheeks. Hilarious to a 14-year-old's mind. And after some convincing, my other 2 cousins were in. But we had to go over the counter of darkness. So we set our alarms at 3 a.m. and pass out. By 3:15, we all sneak outside, throw on our headlamps, and start walking. We know the camera is about a mile away. The trail goes over 2 pretty big hills, and the camera is in a valley on the far side of the second hill. We start walking as normal, and everything is good. The excitement starts building, and we're pretty giddy that we're pulling off this glorious prank. After a few minutes of brisk walking, we get to the top of the second hill. My older cousin knows the area more than me, stops as he gets to the top. As I make my way to the top, I see why. Off of the distance, about 400 yards, is a spotlight. It's bluish and white in color, and it illuminates nearly half the hill at this point. This thing was crazy bright. By this time, all 3 of us were looking at the light, and my older cousin tells us to turn off our headlamps. We stand there in silence. Me, being a 14-year-old pussy I was, started to get freaked out. Aliens is the first thing that comes to mind, and I tell him we have to leave. I turn on my headlamp and turn around and about to head back to the campsite. As soon as I turn my lights back on, the super bright blue light starts slowly to turn and stops right on us. No bobbing or movement for the light besides just a slow, consistent, not pan over us. At that point I know about, with my cousin right behind, I get inside and go straight to bed, pretty much freaking out. Flash forward to the next morning, and all 3 of us go back to the same spot, and then proceeded to go out where we thought the light would have been, and there was nothing there. No boot marks, no lights, no nothing. To this day, we still have no idea.